Of course, I worked for the Hawke government twice, so maybe I'm biased. You know, looking at the Albanese crowd thinking, dear God. So I thought, let me check this with someone who's written a history of the rise of Bob Hawke and the first Hawke government. The book's been so read it's going to fall apart when I hold it up. It's called The Hawke Ascendancy. The author is Paul Kelly, editor-at-large of the Australian newspaper. Paul Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. Bob Hawke's first cabinet had people of enormous talent. I mean, it's just quite extraordinary. There's Paul Keating, Peter Walsh, Gareth Evans, John Button, Bill Hayden, John Dawkins, and others. It's just a really stacked cabinet. It was fantastic. Now, the direct portfolio comparisons with those names in Albanese's shadow cabinet are Jim Chalmers, Chris Bowen, Mark Dreyfus, Penny Wong, and Katie Gallagher. I mean, to me, the comparison is not even close. Has Anthony Albanese got a talent deficit?
I'd make a couple of points about that, Andrew. The first one is that Anthony Albanese is not Bob Hawke in any way, shape or form. He doesn't have Hawke's standing with the Australian electorate. He doesn't have Hawke's judgement. He doesn't have Hawke's capacity to wield a team together. That's a fundamental difference, and it's critically important. The second point is what you're saying about the cabinet is completely correct. The Hawke cabinet of the 1980s was one of the 2 or 3 most talented cabinets since Federation, and Bob Hawke acknowledged that himself. And the success of the Hawke government, while in large part, of course, due to Bob Hawke, was also very much a factor relying on that enormous quality of talent and cabinet among the senior ministers.
But this is the thing for me. Like, even if I was to be absolutely, so generous to Anthony Albanese when he says he wants to be Prime Minister like Bob Hawke, and I think, well, look, that would mean you'd have to, renounce some of your a lot of your political stances. You'd have to develop capacities like Bob Hawke, experience that you don't have, that Bob Hawke certainly did. Even if you allowed all that, can you actually be a Bob Hawke when you don't have a ministry that's anywhere near as talented as Bob Hawke's?
Well, look, we're not going to see another Bob Hawke. Bob Hawke was a unique political phenomenon. Now, I know that Anthony Albanese wants to reassure the Australian electorate by saying that he would govern in the style of Hawke and Keating, and I understand he wants to create that image. But, I mean, it's completely fictitious. I mean, the Hawke-Keating period was 30 years ago, and the country's moved on. The issues are different. We've now got very, very different challenges. So if Anthony Albanese does win the next election, the one certainty is that he will not be governing in a repeat of Hawke and Keating. Now, I understand he's saying he wants to operate according to consensus. Well, it's going to be pretty hard to get consensus in Australia these days, given the way politics has functioned over the course of the last 20 years. Anthony Albanese is going to be himself. He's going to be Anthony Albanese, and I think at the end of the day, he's got to be assessed in terms of his own composition, his own qualities, and his own merits, good or bad.
Look, you raised something I want to pick up on. Yes, Anthony Albanese said he wants to be a Prime Minister in the style of Bob Hawke, which is bringing people together. He was quite specific. That's what he wanted to do, bring people together. How can you do that when your leader in the Senate is Penny Wong, who is comfortable talking only to her own and has not even talked to Pauline Hanson, who commands 2 critical votes in the Senate, if she wants to get anything through. She hasn't talked to Pauline Hanson more than twice in all her time in politics because she finds Hanson distasteful. How can you bring Australia together when you can't even talk to Pauline Hanson?
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you're going to bring Australians together, this means that you need a particular political style. Now, Hawke had that style. Hawke was able to reach out to people, he was able to sit down and talk to them, and he was able to compromise. And I think this is going to be one of the enormous challenges facing Anthony Albanese and his senior ministers if he wins the election. If Albanese is serious about governing by consensus and bringing the country together, that's going to require a completely new spirit in Australian politics, and it will require a government to function and operate in a very different way to anything we've seen over the course of the last 20 years.
Well, I tell you what, a cabinet that includes people like Christina Keneally and Penny Wong and Katie Gallagher, you know, these are people who thrive on tribal hate. I can't see them bringing anyone together, frankly. Paul, I need to switch you quickly now to the war in Ukraine, because I think there is a huge geopolitical shift going on. This war obviously is turning into an absolute disaster for Russia. I mean, maybe it'll crush Ukraine, doesn't matter. Militarily and financially, it is a disaster for Russia. But I also wonder if it is a disaster for China's dictator, Xi Jinping, because he backed Russia a couple of weeks before the invasion, supported Putin's complaints against Ukraine, and is sticking with Russia all through this, despite the rest of the world turning away in horror. It seems to me this is backfiring badly.
Andrew, I think China and Chinese foreign policy is facing an absolute moment of truth now. This is a threshold moment for them, because while China's fudged the issue, all the signs are that China will continue to support Russia, and it now looks as though China might be prepared to support Russia in terms of avoiding the sanctions imposed by most of the rest of the world on Russia, and even being prepared to give Russia some military assistance. Now, what we've seen in the last couple of days, we've seen the United States National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, publicly China against these actions. This was before his meeting with China's top diplomat. And after that meeting, the White House made it very clear that the United States had told China that there would be serious consequences if China supported Russia. Now, Russia at the moment is a pariah state, and China has spent the last 30 years telling people in the United States and Europe that they don't have to worry about the rise of China. It spent 30 years saying that it supports the principles of national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Well, at the moment, it looks as though it's going to trash those principles, and it looks as though it may well line up with Russia in an alliance of the autocracies against a lot of the rest of the world. I think if China does this, it will be a really serious mistake, but deeply revealing. So I think there's a moment of truth coming for China, and the fundamental question is whether the sanctions being imposed on Russia, whether some of those sanctions will be extended to China if China takes these actions in support of President Putin.
And you're really seeing the Chinese stock market in real trouble. That's, of course, also with the coronavirus issues there. And a very fragile housing market, which is one of the biggest sectors. So this could actually prove very, very devastating for Xi Jinping personally. We shall see what happens. Paul Kelly, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.